Welcome to Did You Know? The ESCO HVAC Show. We will see you in about 45 seconds or so. Make sure that you are subscribing to our channels, our LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook. Turn on notifications, and we are very excited to be here with you. It's almost time, about 30 more seconds. Make sure to grab your notebook and pen so you can jot down notes along the way, because at the end of the show, you could have an opportunity to ask our guests questions so we can dive a little deeper into these topics. And here we go. Welcome to Did You Know? The ESCO HVAC Show. All right, welcome everyone to Did You Know? The ESCO HVAC Show. Lisa, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Clifton. How are you?
I'm doing really, really well, thank you. So for those of you who have not spent any time with Lisa, you want to introduce yourself a little bit? You are one of the newest members of our team, but definitely not new to the world of HVAC and to the world of ESCO.
Yeah, definitely. So hello, everyone. I am Lisa Cherney. I am ESCO's newest staff member, about 2.5 months on board. Mm-hmm. I am the education manager. Yep. I have been in this industry for about 4.5 years. Came from another organization, an HVAC association actually, as their education manager. And I have been involved with ESCO actually from my previous job through attendance at the HVAC Excellence Conference, which everybody online right now.
It's where everybody meets.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Yes. So yeah, that's how I got into HVAC. It was accidental, but it was a wonderful coincidence, and I plan to stick around for quite a while.
Absolutely. And it's funny how so many of us just kind of end up in the industry, right?
Yeah.
All right. So I am really looking forward to you being here, and hopefully we'll have plenty more shows. We actually have a special intro that is going to be just for Lisa. So here we go. All right. So the reason we're here today is we want to spend a little bit of time talking about emerging technologies, things that are changing our industry faster than most of us are probably prepared for. So Lisa's a road warrior like myself. Lisa, how many years have you been out doing the conferences and hitting the roads and seeing what's new to the industry?
Well, in the HVAC industry, it's been 4.5 years. AHR Expo, HVAC Excellence, Women in HVACR, the process heating and cooling show that used to take place. Yep. But little known fact, my previous career life was a meeting and event planner. So I've been doing meetings and conferences for longer than I'm going to admit, because then people can figure out how old I am.
That's right. So one thing that Lisa and I can say that we've seen a lot of is change. As with everyone in the industry has witnessed a little bit of change. So we're going to start spending a little bit of time weaving in some pieces of emerging technologies. It's actually going to have its own little piece within our show. Where we talk about specific things that are changing. So we want to make sure that you're aware of where we are and where we're going, because there are a lot of things moving at the same time. We spent a lot of time talking about our refrigerant transition. We spent a lot of time talking about new innovations for equipment like SEER2 and our A2Ls that's going to require mitigation. But what does this stuff actually look like? Last couple of weeks, we've been talking about flammable refrigerants. It's one thing to say something is flammable, but it's another thing to actually show what it is, right? So, Lisa, let's dive into a few different things that we are seeing both here in the US and abroad.
Mm-hmm.
So one interesting one that I really wasn't very aware of until AHR this year. So AHR is a big conference. I know you've attended AHR quite a bit. One of the things that we've seen is a monoblock heat pump. And for those that aren't aware what a monoblock heat pump is we're talking about a standalone heat pump that sits outside that is an air to water source heat pump, right? But the thing that is really going to be unique about this, and the reason we have to amp up our training programs, and the reason us instructors need to be aware of what's coming, is these things are actually very quickly moving into our HVAC industry. So if we have the AHR conference here, which is, gosh, what they have, 35,000 people or so, something like that this
Last year, I
year?
think it was close to 40,
Yeah, a lot of
and
people.
that was the first time they held it since the pandemic.
Exactly. Well, a lot of people don't know that Europe has their own versions of that. So this year, 2023 in Europe, the primary thing, the headliner of the entire show was R290 powered monoblock heat pumps. So heat pumps that sit outside that either heat water or chill water, depending on its use. And because it is a stationary unit that sits outside, it's using R290. So it doesn't fall into as many of the building code requirements. So when we think about it, how many pounds of refrigerant are in a 30-pound cylinder of propane, right? R290 sitting right outside, the exact same kind of refrigerant, just purified to become R290. So we haven't seen them yet here in the US, but the whole monoblock design is here. We're going to talk about that here in a second. So R290 is not widely used in our training programs. And so we really need to step up our game and start talking about these even in our residential and commercial applications, because we're already seeing these in things like ice machines. We did a A3 show here just a few weeks and maybe a couple months ago where we went through a whole bunch of our R290 products that are in commercial ice machines and coolers and a lot of different applications. But these little monoblock heat pumps are the one that people haven't particularly recognized as being something that they need to be aware of and something to teach on. So what are we doing? Well, we're trying to put the refrigerant outside. If we think about existing refrigeration systems, right? Think about a heat pump right now. We have a line set connecting our outdoor unit to our indoor unit. So our refrigerant is able to migrate into our home. So if there's any kind of potential leak, we have the potential for refrigerant leaks inside. So now what we're going to do is we're going to contain all of this into a singular unit sitting outside with a heat exchanger. And we're just going to exchange heat onto a source like water or like glycol, a mixture of water and glycol. We're going to use that as a diluted solution so that we can now move water inside. And what does the equipment look like? It's just another inverter. You hear us talking about inverters a lot. And the reason we do that is because that is becoming our primary means of refrigeration, is a variable capacity system. So it looks a lot like a traditional inverter outdoor unit, except for now, instead of having the indoor coil indoor, it's actually going to be sitting outside as part of our monoblock system. So these are the things that we have to look at, right? Because when we look at, say, Europe, we're already utilizing these in Europe for our cooling and heating capacities because we can do a lot of work with a stationary system. We can keep all of the refrigerant outside. We can condition water. We can condition glycol depending on what climate zone we're in. We can utilize this for our entire water source, especially for the heating side. And then if we get into our 3-pipe systems where we have true heat recovery, now we have the ability to start doing heating and cooling with one singular unit that can just simply move fluids. And that's not something that we've traditionally taught in our programs. It's not something we even see. I mean, you ever seen any commercials for these here in the US? No,
Not yet.
no, not yet. But we are going to see them. But have we seen these? Well, here's the interesting thing as well. So in March, when we went to AHR, we actually seen the first ones hit in the US market. So for those that are watching, and by the way, everyone, let us know where you're chiming in from, right? We have a lot of people joining in. Adam's hopping in here in the future. Yeah, well, Adam, interesting thing about this is, so our Hitachi actually released this year. So this is actually already in the US market and it's running on R32. So this is a full inverter monoblock outdoor unit. Yeah, it basically is a residential. Jameson, you're right. We are basically seeing a residential chiller that is reversible, that can be a heater as well, right? So we're just conditioning what is there. And a lot of people think about traditional split system HVACs and even ductless, and they go, wow, these are really interesting. What else? Well, this is what we have. These are the things that we have to start looking at because they're already in the market. So we don't want to be left behind when it comes to technology. We want to make sure that we're staying up to date with things that are happening around us. So that was the first introduction into the monoblock systems. And when we really dive into it, we're actually going to start seeing these in larger residential and commercial applications. And I know I get it all the time. These are going to be 5 years before we get this stuff. Well, it's not. We're actually working on a CO2 curriculum right now, aren't we?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And the reason we're doing that is take that unit on the left. That Mitsubishi CO2 chiller has actually already been released in the United States. So we're not talking 5 years down the road. We're talking about systems that are already hitting the US market. Now, that R290 has not met our US building code yet, but I can tell you it's being reviewed for installations in the United States because it's already been widely accepted internationally. So it is moving to the US market. How soon? I would not be a bit surprised to see it next year starting to hit
Mm,
residential
really?
applications. Yeah. So it is really getting close. We think about this whole progression to, reduced emissions, to lower global warming potential refrigerants and the equipment that can operate on these low GWP scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when we're talking about some of our refrigerants, our HFCs that are getting phased down, and we look at our replacements, we don't have a ton of replacements, right? So we have to look at what all of the options are. So we are going to see more R290. We are going to see more CO2 systems, and they're going to be here probably faster than you're ready for them. So we have to be prepared for that. So even our CO2, we are already, like if you go over to Australia, Australia is already utilizing inverter driven CO2 systems for water, right? How often do we see CO2 here in the US? Well, you'll see people like Trevor Matthews out here that is starting to really ring the bell for CO2 because we're going to see more products like this. There was a time where CO2 was just an industrial refrigerant. Well, that's not so much the case. We are seeing that more in our commercial, and we have the potential to see those in residential applications. So, an entirely new realm of technologies and refrigerants that we have to be prepared for. Because when they get here, who's going to work on this stuff, right?
Well, Clifton, I have a question for you.
Yep.
So these products that just a couple minutes into the show that you're talking about are coming from overseas, Australia, different companies, etc. So where are we in the US in product development versus international companies? Are we behind the curve? Are we
Yes.
late to the game?
I wouldn't say that we're late to the game. So, when I had the chance to hang out with Hitachi and do some interviews on equipment, what we find was that the US is very forward thinking. Sometimes we're a little slow to accept the building codes as fast as we would like to. We've already seen that with, A2Ls being not as universally accepted across the United States for our building codes, right? So, we have the ability to manufacture this. We just haven't implemented the building codes, and we definitely haven't haven't introduced the training programs and platforms for that. Now, some of these technologies we have, which I want to show you here in just a little bit, some programs that I've been to that are already starting to work with some of these newer products and some of the newer opportunities. What are we teaching? Really, when it comes down to it, if we're already teaching refrigeration, basic refrigeration principles, we're not really changing a whole lot. We're really just changing the refrigerant, and we're changing the means of heat transfer that we're working with. Typically we're conditioning air. Well, maybe now we're going to be spending more time conditioning fluids that are used to condition air. So we're just going to add an additional step. And yeah, it's exactly like you were talking about, Jameson. We're talking about chiller style applications that are going to be utilized in residential applications. Remember, this was the most popular item at the European Equipment Expo this year. So it shows that we're really starting to utilize this technology. So rethink a residential application and just move the indoor coil into maybe an outdoor situation, something where we don't have the refrigerant. Doesn't that change how we look at the refrigerants that are inside of the structure?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the thing that is most relevant, the thing that is most current. So we talk about A2L refrigerants. So a lot of people are just now learning that we are transitioning to our low GWP refrigerants very quickly, right? What about equipment? Well, so far we haven't seen a residential equipment that is utilizing our low GWP refrigerants. So just 2 weeks ago, had the opportunity to go down to Alabama Power and sit in a class with Mingledorf. So if anyone hasn't been over to Mingledorf or doesn't know their training opportunities, they have a lot of things going on. They're a very forward-thinking carrier education partner. Joe, Kenda, hey, looky there. So Joe, thanks for joining. Joe is an expert in the world of new refrigerants and new technologies, right? We're talking about a CO2 direct hot water system, right? So we are going to see more of this stuff. And it air conditions the garage, even better. So
It's
we're
a nice
just,
place to hang out.
yeah, it sounds like it, and we're talking about highly efficient systems. When we're talking about some of these monoblock systems operating on R290, we're talking about COPs that are in the 4 to 5 range. So we're talking as efficient as geothermal systems in, moderate outdoor air temperatures. So when we're down at A-Care, when we're talking about mitigation, a lot of people are wanting to know, okay, what does this look like in residential? When's it going to be here? Well, we're now seeing that our new equipment that's going to be operating on R32 and R454B, which if R454B is a blend of R32 and 1234YF, that's going to be our two primary refrigerants we're going to see in residential applications. But when are we going to see that? Well, we're now seeing it's probably going to be January 2024. We're talking months away from seeing low GWP refrigerants in residential split systems, right?
Oh,
So we need to be prepared for what those look like and to start bringing this into our education for our students and for our technicians. So what we're already seeing in the whole mitigation side of new technologies is we're talking about equipment that can monitor the refrigerants. Remember, when I did that little video on how flammable refrigerants are, we were able to show that A2L refrigerants are not very flammable, but they are, slightly. So we are actually going to start adding some mitigation equipment into our residential systems as early as January. Now, what do we teach on those? Well, we teach what we're doing, all right? So let's take a look at these new residential systems so we have an idea of what those components look like. Now, this is all out of those same classes from Mingledorf. I really appreciate them bringing this information out. This comes directly from carrier training. So that's the first training that we have seen from our manufacturers. And we'll see a lot more of that over the next coming months as we introduce these products. So we're seeing that we really have 3 different levels of mitigation based on how much refrigerant is in the system. And I'm going to show you some A2L systems that we are currently already seeing on the market that don't even have the mitigation requirements because they fit into this M1 standard. So M1 is saying that anything with 3.9 pounds or under, a dissipation system is not required, right? It's a small enough amount of refrigerant that it's not going to be able to be concentrated into the atmosphere to be a combustible refrigerant, or it's not going to be able to even mitigate its expansion of flame. And then we see these from 4 pound to 34 pound. Well, that's going to be a lot of us residential applications, right? That's going to be the equipment that we're going to see first, and it is going to require some mitigation. And then we have our systems that are going to have 169.3 pounds and higher, or charge limits of up to 169.3 pounds and lower is going to have a complete different dissipation system, which we are anticipating. Remember, we haven't seen this one, but we're anticipating this is going to have like a pump down solenoid on it added, so that if we have a release of refrigerant that's picked up by our sensors, we're going to pump the system down, push all the refrigerant to the outdoor system so that the majority of the refrigerant is moved as fast as possible. So 3 different levels that we will see on equipment here in the next few months. So what we're going to do with that is we're going to place sensors within the system. We're going to have them located in the system so that we have 1, 2, or potentially 3 different A2L sensors that are going to be looking for refrigerant leaks. And there is a UL set standards on what that amount of refrigerant leak is. And actually, I might try to link that here in a little bit too. So with these UL standards, we're just going to simply put some sensors into our equipment, and we're going to put a mitigation board, an A2L mitigation board that will be probably in the furnace or in the air handler. Depends on what type of coil it is and if it's a communicating system. So a little bit different in some of our communicating systems, but the concept is still the same. So what we're going to do is that if our refrigerant detection sensors picks up a leak in refrigerant, say our indoor coil has sprung a leak, And it's a large enough leak that our sensors say we need to go into a mitigation process. We need to reduce the amount of refrigerant in this space. Well, because it's tied with our system, we now have the ability to turn on a fan, add some circulation to it, and shut off an outdoor unit. So we're basically just adding a lockout system into our residential unit. And we're going to replace a few components just to make sure that we remove those potential ignition points. We might not remove a contactor, although some of our manufacturers are already moving away from contactors into solid state technology, right? And a lot of inverter technology. So if we have a contactor, we're simply going to go with a contactor that has a cover that would reduce the amount of ignition. It still has a very, very small access point where we can, do a manual control of that contactor for service procedures. Otherwise, any potential spark that would happen on those contact points is going to be reduced, significantly reduced to the point where it could not ignite an A2L refrigerant. And we're going to change the cords that are on our compressor so that we have a flame and ignition resistant socket on our compressor. Just means it's going to be held in better, and our cord is going to be flame resistant, ignition resistant. And so our board is now, if it detects a leak of refrigerant, is going to be able to mitigate the potential release of more gases. So it's going to increase airflow, and it's going to shut off the outdoor unit, and it's going to go into a hard lockout mode. So definitely some changes we're going to see on the residential equipment in a pretty short period of time. All right, so let's move on out past that one. Any questions? Anyone in the chat have any questions where we're at so far? Or Lisa, have anything that you want to add or question in that?
Well, it's kind of a lead-in question, I think.
All right, we like those too.
Because you're talking about these changes coming to the residential environment.
Yes.
And so what I'm thinking is, another buzzword in the industry since COVID is retrofitting.
Oh.
They talk about retrofitting air systems in commercial buildings, etc. If we look at maybe retrofitting in the residential market with all this new technology that's emerging, is retrofitting something that should be considered? Is it a good idea? Because the benefits from what we're talking about so far seem really obvious.
Yes.
Energy savings, financial savings because of that. You're doing good for the environment, low GWP and all that. But what would the financial implication be if you want to retrofit your home or your apartment building?
Exactly. That's a great point. So if we think about what happened with the refrigerant, I actually had a comment that came through on YouTube earlier from a young technician that had really sparked his interest on what's happening with our HFC refrigerants. So if we think about a system, say you've already got, even if you have an R410A, an existing R410A system, did anyone see the price of R410A refrigerant or 134A in any of the HFCs as far as that goes? Anyone see the price of R410A refrigerant go up this year? Yeah, pretty significantly. We've seen drastic changes. And yeah, you're absolutely right, Brad. We're going to show some here in just a minute. There's actually a lot of R32 equipment that is available in the industry right now that people aren't aware of. So if we talk about refrigerant prices alone, if I have an existing R22 system, which you can barely afford anymore, and I have an R410A system that we've seen the prices go up, well, those prices went up because we had a 10% reduction in HFC refrigerant manufacturing based on global warming potential that started a year ago, January of 2022. This January 1st of 2024, we're going to see an additional 30%, which means we're going to be at a 40% reduction of baseline for all HFC refrigerants. So I don't know if I can put a guarantee on this, but I can tell you what happens with supply and demand when we look at the prices, right? If the supply goes up and the demand, or if the supply goes down and the demand goes up, we're going to see the prices go up significantly.
Cha-ching.
Cha-ching. Yep. Exactly. So we're going to see a lot of our HFC allocations being utilized because remember, R32 is an HFC, right? R454 is an HFC blend. It's R32 plus 1234YF, which is an HFO or a synthetically modified HFC. So we're going to see our high GWP refrigerants explode in prices. I'll guarantee it. It's just going to happen.
Yeah.
So the prices of repairing or replacing existing R22 and R410A systems is just probably not even going to be realistic after the
Mm,
first of next year, right?
interesting.
Isn't it though? I hate being that
Yeah.
bell ringer, but we have to. We have to be prepared for this. We have
Mhm.
to educate an entire industry on what these changes are going to look like. All you have to do is look at that 10% reduction that happened a year and a half ago, and look at the prices of refrigerants and go, well, what happened? Well, really, only one thing happened. We had a 10% reduction in the manufacturing of new HFC refrigerants.
Better to talk about it proactively than reactively.
Yes, exactly. That's why we're here, is to talk about things proactively and to be very educated on what these changes are. Remember, this change that's happening in January is 3 times the size of the change that happened in January of 22. So I worry about the prices of our HFC refrigerants. I really do. I think we're going to have a very fast transition in all of our industry. And I think many of these new technologies are going to become standardized in a very short period of time, which is why we're doing this. That's why we're
Yeah.
talking about these things, right? So let's talk about some of these R290 pieces of equipment. A lot of people are really wondering what R290 equipment looks like. Well, you may have already seen it and didn't even recognize it, right? So we did a class here a couple months ago on A3s. We're talking about things that are transitioning. So we have companies like Lear, the largest manufacturer of ice chest here in the United States. They have already converted their products over to 290. So if you see a new ice chest sitting outside of a gas station, convenience store, or wherever you're at, very good chance that it's already got R290 in it. So as technicians, we have to be prepared to work on these highly flammable refrigerants. Remember, in that demonstration, I showed that A1, a little bit of flame propagation, not much. A2, quite a bit. A2L, very little. But A3, this is highly flammable stuff and takes special training for that. So we have to be prepared and trained for these new pieces of equipment. We've also seen a lot of our ice machine manufacturers, including Manitowoc, they're already teaching and they're already distributing R290 ice machines. So we have a lot of R290 equipment that's already out there. All right, so let's look at what does that mean for a technician? Well, it simply means they're going to be labeled differently and we're going to have special handling of our refrigerant. So I highly recommend anyone that encounters these symbols, if you're not already trained in handling these refrigerants, that you get trained in handling, because it is a little bit different than what you're used to with A1 refrigerants, right? So we're going to label our equipment. Depending on whether it is an A2L or it is an A3, it's going to have its own unique designations on the equipment to identify that. Our A3 is going to be labeled very extensively. We're already seeing this. So we've got training centers. Matter of fact, I think this next slide, yeah. So these are some actual pictures that I've taken out in the field. So that center one, the one with the little red indicators on it, if you take even the 608, our updated 608 talks about the red identifiers, the red labels, the red stickers and sleeves that we put on equipment that identifies systems as being A3, highly flammable refrigerant equipment. Well, this piece of equipment is already at the UA 449 out in Pennsylvania. So we have facilities that are already doing training. True has had R290 systems out for a decade now. So what looks different on our R290 systems? Well, let's think about it realistically. What do we not want to do with R290? Catch it on fire, right? So we're simply going to reduce the potential for ignition on our refrigerants if they happen to spring a leak or are released unintentionally during servicing. So we're going to take things like our start components and we're going to put them in their own compartments, maybe, or we're going to seal them better. Maybe we may use different actual start components. Our relay could be different, and our motors are now going to be shielded. So any place that we have potential ignition sources, we're going to remove those from the circuit so that we can reduce the potential for combustion. That's all. Remember, think about combustion. We need 3 things: fuel, oxygen, and ignition. So if we have fuel, there's plenty of oxygen around it. So we just need to reduce the ignition. And that's what we're seeing. So it's nothing super crazy, but it's things that we need to be aware of when we're working on these. Here's the one for the naysayers, right? So we've already actually manufactured R290 highly flammable mini split systems. We don't sell them in the United States. They wouldn't apply to any building codes. Heck, a third of our country still hasn't even accepted A2Ls for residential applications. But there are places around the world that have already started utilizing R290 for ductless mini split systems. So they are out there. Yeah, Patrick, you're right. True was they've had training for a long time on this stuff. We're actually updating an A3 training right now to be able to talk about this new equipment and new standards and new practices. So thanks for joining us, Patrick. So a lot of things in those flammable refrigerants already out there. Lisa, you know anyone's bought a new refrigerator in the last 5 years?
A new refrigerator. I actually happen to have gotten a new refrigerator about 2 years, not even 2 years ago.
That's about when I got mine. Do you
Mhm.
know what refrigerant is probably in that refrigerator?
Um, you know, now that I work at ESCO, I should know. But
Yes.
when I got the refrigerator, I didn't work for ESCO, so I have
Right.
no clue.
A lot of people don't. So a lot of them have went to R600, which is isobutane, another A3 highly flammable. So a lot of our residential refrigerators have already went there. They don't look drastically different. They're just going to be labeled different, and they're going to have ignition resistant components to it. So if you're an educator and yes, R600A, Patrick, you're right. Thank you. If you're looking for R290 training opportunities, we did another show with North Park to be able to go through their 290 trainer. So not only do they have an R290 trainer for the classroom, they have an R290 heat pump trainer as well. And when we did that class, I had some people question, well, why'd you do a R290 heat pump trainer? Well, they had it made in Europe, and we're already seeing R290 heat pumps in Europe. So they're actually a step ahead of the game. So if you're interested in teaching on R290 equipment, just be aware we have already started preparing our industry for the training on highly flammable gases. It's just coming. It's part of it. All right. So what about these A2Ls, right? Brad brought up a great point. So there is let's say from the domestic manufacturers of equipment, currently the only product that I have seen released for purchase is the Daikin Atmosphera, which is an R32 based ductless system. Here's why I'm ringing this bell. About 3, I guess maybe 4 weeks ago, I went to my local Costco. In my local Costco, every window unit, every portable air conditioner and dehumidifier was already utilizing R32, right? It's actually become a somewhat common refrigerant here in the United States, and people haven't even noticed that yet. They're not aware that it's already here. So the reason we talk about this is so that our training programs and our contractors and our technicians can be prepared for when they encounter these, because it's very likely you're going to encounter those in the near future because they've already hit the market. When I said domestic manufacturers, that was for a reason, because there is a lot of equipment that gets imported into the United States and sold to US consumers that flies under radars, right? We track refrigerant shipping because we're looking for, artificially manufactured and, synthetic refrigerants that look like HFCs. We're looking for illegal refrigerants, right? So the EPA does a good job of monitoring and tracking that. But what about equipment? Well, you can go on Amazon right now, and there are a variety of manufacturers of R32 ductless systems. There's even some Mitsubishi R32 ductless systems out there that can be purchased directly over Amazon, right? So what that means is there are consumers. We've seen over the last couple of years a lot of consumer marketing for self-installed ductless systems, which I'm highly against. But what I have to do is make sure that we are well prepared for the ramifications of that. That means that as contractors, as technicians, we're going to get calls for R32 ductless systems that have been improperly installed. It's just how it is, right? Whether it's right or it's wrong, that's what the reality is. So does your local distributor even bring back R32? Have they prepared for R32 recovery storage, right? So these are things that we have to look at. These are things we have to start teaching on right now. What if I am an educator and I'm trying to prepare my students for what the industry is going to look like? Well, in the past, we've been able to prepare students knowing what the industry was going to look like. And our industry has progressed so fast that right now, you may not know what next year looks like. You may not know what 2 years looks like. You probably don't know what 3 years. We don't even know what 3 years looks like. I can almost guarantee that everything we've talked about will be something we will see in the US in the next 3 to 5 years. So if we're planning now and we're preparing students for when they become good technicians, then we have to start teaching this and we have to start talking about these differences right now. Because I'll guarantee there's consumers out there installing those, except they're just sitting on Amazon.
Right. So that scares me a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But Clifton, let's throw out there a little bit of a digression you and I talked about before the show today.
Okay.
So you read that description and it says pre-charged, pre-charged heat pump.
Yes.
So with the knowledge I have in just 2.5 months at ESCO, my first question is, how can Amazon get away with that? Is there Joe Smith in the shipping department who is 608 certified, and that is how they're allowed to ship these things to a consumer? I don't understand Amazon of all organizations, how they pull this off.
Exactly. I'm so glad you brought that up. So let's think about this for a second. So our EPA 608 is a license that we are required to have for the safe handling and recovery of refrigerant, right? Well, when I did my little video on flammable gases, I was able to demonstrate that refrigerants, chemicals, especially HFCs, are used for a variety of things besides just refrigerants. And there are other sectors that do not fall under the Section 608, unfortunately, right? Well, if we look at these, what we're typically seeing, like, I won't say any brands, but there are some companies out there that are homeowner installed systems that have pre-charged line sets. And a lot of people are aware that we used to have pre-charged line sets even in residential applications. Rheem used to make quite a bit of them. Coleman for residential applications. A lot of those earlier systems had pre-charged line sets, which mean they had self-piercing fittings, and the refrigerant was actually in the line set, so that the outdoor unit was in a vacuum, the indoor unit was in a vacuum. You put the line set on and you connect it, it pierces the line set, and the refrigerant is allowed to flow through the indoor unit and then the outdoor unit when it's connected. And that's what we're seeing. So we're talking about line sets that are pre-charged with refrigerant. And I can tell you, I bought because I was very curious, I tore it apart to do a whole bunch of training videos. I purchased, it was an R410A, but it was a single zone 120 volt ductless inverter so that I could tear it apart. And the outdoor unit did come pre-charged with R410A. So you can buy both, all from Amazon. You can buy systems that the equipment is pre-charged, and you can buy equipment that has line sets that are pre-charged. And the homeowner is expected to have it installed by a qualified contractor. But the
God
reality
forbid
is,
they try and install it
it's not.
themselves.
Exactly. What if my indoor unit or my outdoor unit had a leak on it? Homeowner can't validate that. So when these line sets are connected to a system and I had a leak, my piece of equipment that had a leak actually has air in it now. So I've introduced air into my refrigerant, and I have also allowed a leak to happen. So I'm a huge proponent of inverter technology and ductless mini split systems, but by a professionally trained and qualified contractor. It's the only way. But what's going to happen when we get these calls? I've already talked to contractors that won't work on these. They say, well, you bought it, it's yours, not installed properly. I don't want anything to do with it. But I've also talked to contractors that are taking those jobs. So what we have to be aware of is that there is equipment out there on the market right now with R32, and can't go in your R410A recovery jug. It needs to go in a separate jug, needs to be handled differently. And it is an A2L, and it doesn't have mitigation equipment because it is underneath of that 3.9, that 4-pound rating. So yes, Lisa, it is a scary thing, but we have to be aware of that, and we have to teach our students and our new technicians and even us older technicians that this stuff is out there. It's not that we've been waiting on it and it's not here. It's already here, and we're just not educated. So
Yeah.
that's what we do on the Did You Know show.
Uh-huh.
We answer those questions you may not be familiar with. So at my local Costco right here in Avon, Indiana, every unit on the shelf is an R32 system. A2L. If you did not know, most manufacturers have already started building their PTAC units in R32. All of our domestic major manufacturers have started constructing R32 systems, PTAC units. So for those of you that are into, multi-family that uses them, or if you're into hotel management, building management, utilizing PTAC units, you might be surprised to find that the next box that you open is actually an R32 system. This is why we do this. Thank you so much, Edgar. On those systems that have the pre-charge line sets, no, it doesn't. That's the sad part about it. That's why I wish they were not able to be sold. That's the reason we have distributors and licensed contractors, is to make sure that things are properly installed so that they can maintain their efficiency. And what happens is they don't, realistically, in many applications. So they're out there just waiting for you. Ductless systems with R32, window air conditioners with R32, dehumidifiers with R32, and PTAC units with R32. Some of those window units, the Friedrich window units, have been out for about 5 years or so. They're actually in stock at most distributors, if you didn't already know.
So, Clifton, quick
Yes.
question. You said earlier in the presentation today that A2L and R32 mini split systems, the refrigerant itself, the R32, may not necessarily be part of the housing code. And I'm
That's a
paraphrasing you, of course. I
nope.
apologize.
You're right. You're on it.
But so, do you know of exact locations where it is allowed or exact locations where it is absolutely not yet allowed?
Yeah, so ASHRAE actually keeps that updated. Let me see if I've got that QR in here, because we talked about that a while back. I know I've got all the SNAP regulations, and let me see. All right. So if you stay connected to all of your current AHRI regulations, all of our ASHRAE codes, they actually will discuss periodically what states have accepted and those that are still in process. So there are states that have not accepted A2L requirements, which it also goes back to that. What if I'm a contractor and I get called out onto a mini split that a homeowner installed on their own and it is not functioning properly, and they want me to take a look at it, and I get there and I am in a state that has not accepted A2Ls in the residential construction and building codes?
What do you do?
I can't work on that legally. It should have never been installed. So then it gets to a point of, okay, can I evacuate and recover this refrigerant and inform the homeowner that this is not an applicable appliance in this state and I cannot fix it? I'm
And
telling
are
you
they
that.
going to understand that?
Right. Exactly. That's why we have to educate on this stuff. It's an interesting time to be in the HVAC and refrigeration industry.
Yeah. A lot of wild cards.
Yeah, a whole lot of wild cards. Here's one of my favorite ones. So we know that our inverter are DC driven, right? So our inverters utilize DC. What we're starting to see a lot of here in the US market, we're starting to see a lot of AC/DC inverter heat pump systems that are solar operated as well. And so the immediate thought, people go, oh, okay, well, if I'm an off-gridder, and well, yes. So the off-grid people have definitely picked up on this, but we're starting to see a lot of residential consumers looking for these options as well, because we can actually operate an inverter heat pump off from solar panels and reduce our energy consumption. We can turn the energy efficiency of that, we can crank it up in a hurry. Okay. So I was actually very curious on the market demand of these. There's a couple of manufacturers that are already, or there's a lot of distributors, a couple of manufacturers. I called one of my distributors for, particular one was the EG4, which is they have a 1.5, and 2 ton solar powered ductless inverter heat pump systems. And the demand here in the United States market has increased so much in the last 2 years that they cannot keep them in stock. And currently the 2 ton is on back order till September.
Wow.
Yeah. So what that tells us is the demand for high efficient, low global impact equipment is on the rise, which means we have to prepare our students and our technicians for these technologies right now. because they operate, take this particular one, it doesn't operate refrigerantly different, but it operates mechanically different. We're using a separate board inside of the piece of equipment to bring in DC power from our solar panels, and our unit will operate. And we've actually got one out there that operates 100% on solar panel. It doesn't even have an AC connection. But what a lot of these intermediate level non-battery backup units do is they bring in the DC voltage from the solar panel. And if the current is high enough, it operates completely on solar. And so the board actually will balance out. So it is an inverter board. It brings the incoming AC, it converts it to a DC signal. Then we have the DC coming in from our solar panels, and then they meet. And our board will say, okay, if our solar panel, I guess I'm looking at myself backwards there. If my solar panel is high enough current to supply the operating power for my compressor, if my wattage is high enough, I'll just run on solar. And when it drops in the evening, my AC will compensate, but it won't switch. It merely compensates. So that as long as our solar panel has any type of UV to it, we're actually going to generate power and reduce our AC consumption on that system. And we talk about these from the educational aspect. And so the question is, well, is anybody teaching on those? Yeah, actually they are. So I got a good friend of mine, Coy Riley, up at Ivy Tech in Lafayette, Indiana. They have a solar program right next to their HVAC program. And right in between them in the HVAC department is a solar HVAC ductless inverter. And I'll show you a quick video on what that thing actually looks like. All right. So I went up there, I've been a few months ago to take a look at this system and talk with a little bit. Look at them, it looks like a traditional ductless system, except when we have these additional solar wires coming into it. It goes over to, there's that separate board that modulates the incoming DC from the solar and decides which command voltage, whether it's the incoming AC or DC, supplies it. And he's had this system in operation for over 7 years, teaching the students about AC DC solar inverters as part of their HVAC program. And if you're in the solar program, you get to see how solar intervenes with the HVAC as well. Okay, a little glitch on that video feed. I'm going to take that out of there anyhow. So we're going to see this stuff more and more and more, which means we have to prepare technicians to be able to work on this. It's a big change, isn't it?
Cool, though.
Yes. All right, so let's talk about tools real quick. And one question that we get quite often, especially when we do our A2L and our low GWP classes, is what about tools? Will my existing tools work for what we're doing? Well, you need to check. And so a lot of our tool suppliers and tool manufacturers are already stepping up the game to identify what tools are capable to work with A2L refrigerants, and some of them have even labeled theirs with the A3s. So up until this last year or so, most of our A3 tools were very specific for the A3 industry. Now we're starting to see tools that are blending over into multiple categories. So you need to make sure that your equipment is labeled properly and certified to work with A2L and A3 refrigerants. Said some of them are multiple capable. This particular one is showing that it actually works on A2, A2L, and A3, which means it's capable of working in all 4 of the refrigerant classes. Something very, very new to us. That's a lot of information.
The future is now.
The future is now, and that's really why we do this show, is so we can talk about all of the different things that are happening in real time and be prepared a little bit ahead of time. What if I'm a program and I'm looking to allocate some R32 equipment for my program? Your program might take you 6 months, 9 months, or a year to get the adequate funding to be able to bring in some new equipment. Well, if we wait until next year to put in our proposal for funds, we might be 2 years before we actually get the equipment set up and are training on it. And we have the equipment in the field right now. So it's a lot to think about. All right.
Yeah.
So, Lisa,
Yes.
how has the industry changed? What have you seen changing in the industry in the time that you have been in HVAC?
I have, reflecting back, I've seen way more interest in the industry
Mm.
from students, from other professionals. Maybe it's a career change. Um, it- it's not as
Uh-oh, I lost you. Uh, while we're waiting for Lisa
okay.
to, oh,
Sorry.
there's our audio.
So, funny story, but we'll talk about it some other time. I have a career history of self muting myself when I'm on video.
This is a good
That
follow-up.
story for another day. So, but I've seen, there was a stigma, as we all know, for generations that if you went into a trade, it was looked down upon.
Yeah.
Oh, you weren't smart enough to go to a real college, etc. And I think that there is such a huge pivot in that attitude now.
Yep.
Um, so I've seen a lot of that. It's great to see more women getting involved. We got a long
Huge
way to
change.
go, but it's starting.
It is.
More minorities being represented in the
Yes.
industry,
We see that at our own
which is
conference. It's a
it.
huge change
Oh
in the
my
last few
gosh,
years.
it's awesome.
Yes.
Um, and just because of the newer and revived interest in HVACR, you go to these conferences and they're selling out.
Yes.
You have more exhibitors, just like at HVAC Excellence. The exhibits are sold out. I mean,
Yeah.
it's amazing, and the conference isn't until
We're
March.
already full. Yeah. So
Yeah,
those of you joining, that's a place you want to be this next year to,
get registered.
sit firsthand with the people that are teaching and, building this content and curriculum.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think that the industry goes hand in hand with the overall global awareness and
Yeah.
concern about being environmentally responsible, environmentally conscious, doing the right thing for the next generation. And
Exactly.
honestly, our industry is right at the front line of that.
I love it. I think we're at the
Yeah.
cusp of being a high end career field. You
And
know,
I say this ever since the pandemic, when people find out, oh, you work in the HVAC industry, how'd you get into that?
yeah,
I explain to people there's a reason why during the pandemic we were instantly deemed as essential workforce.
you betcha.
You have to have air conditioning and heating and refrigeration and cooling. We are never going out. We are never going to be out of business. And if you're not hooked up for the ride, you should be, because it's going to be fun and it's going to be wild.
It is. I love it. I mean, it gets me excited when we talk about all this
Great
change.
futures.
It is. I think about the young students and the young technicians in this industry that have a vast amount of knowledge to learn, but an incredible amount of opportunity
Mhm.
and support. We're all here to support you. We want you to become the best that you can be.
Yep.
So if
Yep. And I think when younger generations who are getting out of going into high school even and already know, oh, God, I don't want to go to college.
right.
But what am I going to do with my life? My parents will kill me if I don't get a good
Hmm.
job. What a sigh of relief, and what a huge door that opens in front of them when someone introduces them to the concept of, you can get a fabulous job, better than your friend going into accounting or economics, and you get to work with your hands, you get to be outside, you get to set your own schedule, and the opportunities are so vast.
I think about just the own opportunities that I had growing up in the industry.
Mm,
I mean, there were some, it was fun that, you had to kind of look for what you wanted to do. Think about some of these young students and technicians. I mean, could you imagine walking outside and seeing a solar panel and go, wonder who works on that?
mhm.
And then maybe seeing, a inverter heat pump connected to a solar panel and go, who works on that? I bet that's a high demand job. Well, think about who's going to work on this equipment. It's our
Right,
industry,
right.
right?
And
Call the
people will always need technicians.
exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah. So we will always be a source of education and opportunity for this industry. Whatever you're looking for, Do you want to learn more about low GWP refrigerants and how to get certified for safely handling and working with these? Are you a distributor that is wanting to have a security for the contractors that's buying your equipment? Do you want to know that they are properly trained? Well, this is how you do it. You get them through a course, you validate that they have been properly trained and certified to work on equipment, and now you have an insurance policy in your pocket that things are going to be properly done. So,
Yep.
a lot of fun things going. Any
There is little
let's
to no downside to it.
No, there's not.
Yeah.
All right, so still quite a few people out there in the audience. Anyone have any questions or comments that they would like to add? And definitely let us know where you're chiming in from. We love to know where
Mhm.
people are joining us, and it's always interesting to see the vast scope that we get sometimes.
So, Clifton, we know that you're in lovely Indiana.
I am.
I am coming from the lovely Chicago suburbs at the ESCO home office.
Yes.
So, where is everybody else? Yeah.
I know. Sometimes I seen Joe Kakinda out there earlier. Surely he can chime in. Oh, Adam, I thank you. Adam, we appreciate you. It's all about just talking. Professionals talking about the things that we're going to encounter in the real world. Some of this stuff is already out there. Some of it is going to be here in the very near future. Some of it might take a little bit before it gets here, but there is a very high chance that as a technician, you're going to encounter this. And so we just need to be prepared for it. That's all.
Yeah. Well, and think about it, Clifton. When you think forward, a future concept, like you said, if an education program hasn't put in for their financial support from their institution yet, if they wind up being 2 years behind the curve, guess where the business and the students are going? They're
Yeah,
going somewhere else.
exactly. If I'm a contractor and I'm looking for a technician, if I have a student that comes to me and says, I just got out of the HVAC program and I have exposure to solar. And they go,
Oh,
tell me more about this.
yeah.
What kind of experience did you get? Because I've never encountered that. And they go, yeah, I've got some experience on a solar heat pump. Now we're talking about someone who's had exposure to the actual industry. And a lot of our programs just don't have it only because they're not aware. And that's what we do. I might give me one of those brass bells. I might put a damper on it, but it'd still be fun to ring.
Just don't get an air horn. That's a little too obnoxious.
All right. Well, we sure thank everyone for joining us this week. And we look forward to these wonderful conversations, these fun times hanging out, and just getting a chance to talk about this, Wild West, as you said, Lisa.
It's a lot to talk about.
All right. Thank you all. We'll see you next week on Did You Know? The ESCO HVAC Show. Bye.
Thank you.